excuse me. Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Move to encircle HB178.
Motion is to circle House Bill 178. Discussion of that motion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? House Bill 178 is encircled. Madam Reading Clerk? Oh, it's before us, representatives. Go ahead, Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. This is a relatively straightforward bill. If you look at it on the system, it's short, it's simple. It simply says, lines 82 through 84, that a municipality may not require a residential landlord to deny tenancy to an individual based on that individual's criminal history. This bill was first brought to me, Mr. Speaker, in a couple of years ago. And folks said to me, "Would like you to help us with a bill." And I said, "Well, explain the bill to me." And they explained it, and I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm too comfortable telling landlords what they can and can't do." And they said, No, you're misunderstanding the bill." And I said, "Well, I thought I heard you, but that can't make sense. It can't be true that municipalities can say to landlords, if you rent to someone with a recent criminal history, you can't be a part of the Good Landlord program, or we're going to penalize you for that." And I said, that can't be correct. That can't be what's happening under law right now. And they said, oh, yeah, it is. We, under current law, allow municipalities to penalize landlords who would like to rent their premises to someone who has a recent criminal history. Now, if you think that's odd, you're right. We, a couple of years ago, passed the JRI, the Justice Revitalization Initiative, that made significant movement in the direction of trying to help individuals who are in prison or jail right now and who really shouldn't be. Maybe they're there because of a substance abuse problem or a mental health issue. Maybe they're there because of a nonviolent crime. We're trying to get these individuals back up out of prison, out of jail, on their feet and in a position where they can contribute to society, where they can provide for their families, where they can help be good examples or role models for their children. And that's a critical thing. We did the right thing 2 years ago when we passed JRI. My good friend from Kearns worked tirelessly in that effort. Right now, what we've got before us is a barrier, an obstacle to allowing that to happen for these folks. For those cities, and there are about a dozen of them across the state of Utah, Ogden's the primary one in terms of size. For those cities that have good landlord programs, there are about a dozen of them that say to their landlords who are in the good landlord program, if you rent to someone who's been released from prison or jail in the last 4 years, we're going to either throw you out of the good landlord program or we're going to impose monetary penalties on you that are significant. I think that's wrong. And the people who have looked at this, you've received some information yesterday about this bill, indicating the number of groups and organizations that are supporting it. And it's a broad spectrum. Everybody from the Utah Department of Corrections, Adult Probation and Parole, the Utah Association of Counties, Utah Grassroots, Libertas, Coalition of Religious Communities, Crossroads Urban Center, the YWCA, and on and on. The Utah Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, Utah Housing Coalition, the Utah Sentencing Commission, people who are interested in ensuring that the citizens of the state of Utah have the ability to move forward in their lives. Those are the individuals who are in support of this bill. They recognize it's already difficult enough for individuals who have recently been released from prison or jail to find someone who is willing to lease housing to them. We certainly don't need the municipalities putting their thumb on the scale of a scale that's already balanced against these individuals to a disproportionate degree. We don't need municipalities putting their thumb on the scale and making it even more difficult for individuals to get back up on their feet. With that, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, that's my presentation. I'd welcome any comments or questions from the body.
Thank you, Representative. Discussion to the bill. Representative Jeremy Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pro Tem, I move Amendment 1 in my name.
Motion is to move Amendment 1 under Representative Peterson's name. Would you like to speak to that?
I would. I support the sponsor's efforts to help felons coming back into our society become reintegrated and be successful in their future endeavors. However, and let me say that if all of our communities were created equally and were homogenous, that we wouldn't need this bill and we wouldn't necessarily need good landlord programs. But let's talk about putting the thumb on the scale. The state puts its thumb on the scales of our communities frequently. For instance, in the 1990s, the state decided to place 50% of all of our halfway house beds in Ogden City, a city of 85,000 people. That's a burden that Ogden City has bore since that time. The genesis of the Good Landlord program, and the reason that we have these laws in the books, is because of Ogden City, where we had so many people coming from Draper Prison into our city, they were becoming geographically concentrated in specific neighborhoods. As much as we want to house felons and provide a way for them to reintegrate, that geographic concentration prevented them from being successful. And in fact, the neighborhoods began to become very unsafe. And so the Good Landlord program was created in Ogden to help geographically spread that population throughout the city. We recognize that that's a burden that we have to bear as a community, but we have to manage it. So the Good Landlord program allowed the city to do that. It's actually helped the situation. The neighborhoods have become safer, and it's become a better place to live for all of us that are there in the city. The city has also understood that there might be some limitations to the Good Landlord program that might be handicapping some of these felonious individuals coming into our community because of the requirements. And so recently, the city instituted a program in partnership with Adult Probation and Parole to allow good landlords who receive a discount for following the guidelines, which permitted them to house felons that have been vetted by APMP. This program went into effect in September. It's working. And this bill would actually eliminate that program and put Ogden City, my community, at a significant disadvantage. So what the bill does, or what the amendment does rather, is it exempts municipalities that have a halfway house in it. There are two. There's Ogden City, and then there's West Valley City. And Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, that is what the amendment does.
Thank you, Representative. To the amendment, Representative King.
Thank you. I resist this amendment. I don't think it's a good amendment for this reason. First of all, there are a number of reasons. There's no evidence that community correctional centers, halfway houses, have an impact on public safety at all. This is something that Ogden City feels strongly about, but interestingly, West Valley City does not. They haven't pushed this aspect of the Good Landlord program, the felony exclusion under the Good Landlord program at all. And Salt Lake City, which probably has more halfway houses than any and has its own Good Landlord program, doesn't have a felony exclusion either. So the idea that you need a felony exclusion to help disperse bad actors within the city is just not right. What happens is not all landlords are participating in the Good Landlord program. So the effect of having a Good Landlord program with this felony exclusion actually does the reverse of what my good friend and colleague from Ogden is saying. It concentrates individuals who have problems in their conduct and who are recently released from prison or jail even more heavily among those landlords that are not participating in the Good Landlord program. And there are a number of them. So the idea of getting away from concentrating folks in one area doesn't hold water. But more importantly in some ways is this. If you're a landlord in Ogden, why should you have different rights? Why should you have different economic incentives for doing your work as leasing out property than a good landlord in North Ogden or in West Haven or in Morgan or in Salt Lake City or any place else in the city, or in the state, rather. This is a fundamental issue about private property rights. What we're dealing with here is, do we want to allow the government to interfere with the ability of a landlord to make decisions about who they want to rent to? If you believe that it's appropriate for the government to be allowed to do that, vote in favor of this amendment. But I don't believe that's appropriate, and I don't think most of the people in the body do either.
Thank you, Representative. Discussion to amendment number 1. If your light's on, you're discussing amendment number 1. Representative Noel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor of the amendment yield to a question?
The sponsor of the amendment yield?
Yes.
A series of questions.
Proceed.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Speaker. The question I have is this, is there evidence that felons that have served their time, that are out, whether they're on probation or they've actually served their time, that they're more of a, that they commit more crimes, or that they're more of a hazard to the property owner? Is there evidence there?
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, 50% of the inmates coming out of our Northern Utah Criminal Correction Center reoffend. So the recidivism rate's about 50%.
Okay, so that's the concern that you have. Is there evidence that a person that signed up for the good landlord, which costs money, which is more expensive it's less expensive than if you don't sign up for it? Is there evidence that those individuals have had problems with felons in the past? Is there any evidence on that?
Just to clarify, so you're...
Let me clarify. It's my understanding that it costs, if you're in the Good Landlord program, you pay so much per unit. If you're not in it, then you pay like 10 times that amount. Is that correct? Or $87 as opposed to $8. Is that correct?
In Ogden City, landlords who participate in the Good Landlord program are charged a $13 licensing fee. Those that do not are charged an $87 fee.
Okay, so $13 opposed to $87. That's a significant amount. I guess what I find myself in a very interesting situation where I actually agree strongly with the good representative from Salt Lake City and disagree with my good representative friend from Ogden. And that's kind of a unique situation to be in, but I think this is a private property right.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
This is actually a private property right. And I think basically what we've done in this Good Landlord program is we have absolutely made it almost impossible not to be in the program because of the costs that are involved. So there really is no choice. You're either in it and you pay $13, or you're out of it and you pay $87. So it's almost like a forced effort to be in it. So I think it goes back to basic property rights and what, and you still, I think there's other reasons you can deny people other than felony. If they have issues, other issues with employment and things, there's things you can do to sort people out. So I think it still leaves the prerogative to the landowner, the landlord, to be able to decide who they want in their building, in spite of the fact that the person is a felon. One of the things we try to do in this program is try to rehabilitate people, and we find when we automatically categorize them in a category that they're going to be offenders in the future, it really harms the program. There's so many things you can't do anyway when you're a felon. There's many licenses you can't get. There's lots of things and privileges that you use. But this really goes down to a basic private property right, and I think we're stepping beyond the bounds to try to change that and allow the city and the municipality to make a decision for the property owner. So I'd be opposed to the amendment in support of the bill as it stands.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to amendment number 1. Representative Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Just want to speak in favor of the amendment. I understand the property rights thing. I understand it well. And I object to these good landlord programs in general because you're paying somebody to not rent to somebody. However, in this case, what we've got is we have special situations in the state, like a concentration of homelessness here in one spot. Ogden has a concentration of felons in one spot and there needs to be a solution to be able to break that up, just like Salt Lake's trying to figure out how to break up the concentration that they have. If we take this tool away from Ogden City, I understand the principles that we would do it on, but what are you going to replace it with? What are the other solutions to this if this doesn't work? So far, the compromise was, let's see if there's something in between that does work. So we started down that road, and here we are just a few months into it, and we're asking to pull the rug out from under Ogden City in their attempt to try and do it. I support the amendment the way it is, in spite of what appears to be an unfriendly amendment to property rights. I think Ogden needs this tool. Thank you.
Further discussion to the amendment. Representative Frower.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. As a former sponsor of some revisions to the Good Landlord program over the last several years, I'm fairly familiar with the current statute. I'm fairly familiar with Ogden's perspective, as well as the Good Landlord program throughout the state. And I would agree there are cities that use this for revenue enhancement rather than the intent of this program that was started in Ogden, by the way, as the good representative from Ogden has stated, to reduce the impact, disproportionate fees is what was based on to our local police, fire departments, because of certain individuals that impacted neighborhoods, and they were concentrated in certain neighborhoods by virtue of the location of the halfway house in Ogden City. So I would say two things regarding the discussion so far. Number one, this is a property rights issue. There's no question about it. But let's keep in mind, Representative, property rights not only apply to the person that owns that particular rental property, but the neighbors also have property rights, and they have rights to have protection and not have decreased property values because of certain landlords that may concentrate felons in that particular neighborhood. So it is a property rights issue, but let's keep in mind property rights go more than just individual ownership of property. You owe, and we give rights to those people that surround rental housing. I'd also disagree with the comments that were made as far as not being able to disperse felons throughout neighborhoods. The compromise that the city agreed to, that I was involved with discussions over the past year, was an agreement to let Ogden City go ahead with a voucher program, which they did. To my knowledge, they've now produced 68 people that have come out of the halfway house with a voucher system, which basically says they sit down with the inmate being released. They go through the obligations, the criteria to be placed in housing. Those vouchers are now given to Ogden City that has the housing information, the housing inventory that gives the ability of these felons to be dispersed throughout the city rather than just in one geographic location. I don't know the percentage of participants of the Good Landlord program versus those that don't, but my experience as a property management and realtor, we have far more people in the Good Landlord program than we do without that. So it gives far larger opportunities, far more inventory if we're looking to disperse these felons throughout the city, which is really the key. That's the key provision here, is that let's put these in all areas of the city rather than just one area. Let's not let them congregate, because we know that when these individuals come out and they congregate, they have a far greater propensity to reoffend and be back in the halfway house. So I would say let Ogden have the chance to run their voucher program. They started it. It appears to be successful at this point in time. I think the amendment would give them the ability to complete it. I would urge your support of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to the motion to amend. Representative Briscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise in opposition to the amendment. I know 12 blocks in downtown Salt Lake City very well. There are no homes. There are apartment buildings and there are some condos. A number of the apartment buildings have a large section of Section 8 housing where people are paying $3 a month of rent because that's 10, 20, 30% of their income. Because they're on Social Security disability, $750 a month. And it's heartrending when someone gets out of jail or gets out of prison or gets out of the road home and has a friend who has an apartment and crashes on a couch or on a floor and is looking for a place to stay. And they can't find a place to stay because 80 to 90% of the apartments ask them if they have a felony of or a conviction of the last 4 years and say, we won't take your application. Or we'll take your application fee. We're working on that issue here too. But now that we know that you have that problem, you can't stay here. We won't even look you in the face and interview you and say, this person might have had a felony, but we're going to take a chance and we're going to let you have a place. I would suggest to you that one of the reasons this recidivism rate is so high is because current law allows some municipalities to say you cannot participate in our program unless you deny any of these people an opportunity to stay in your place. There's nothing in the original bill that requires any landlord to rent to any particular person, yet only tells cities you cannot forbid it. And I struggle to see these people work to get jobs, to see them work to find housing and a roof over their head, and they don't want to go down to the road home. And they can't get into a place because people won't rent to them. And in some instances, we have entire cities telling people you cannot rent to them and receive advantages of the Good Landlord program. So, with all respect, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to the motion to amend. Representative Cutler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I did a little research on this last evening, and one of the programs I understand they've got, and I'm sure the good representative from Ogden can mention this, is a waiver program where they will, and I know Midvale has this as well, where they allow an individual landlord who has a tenant that they want to allow to come into that home to apply for a waiver program. And then the adult probations and parole can say, yes, this individual is meeting the conditions of their parole. They're doing the things they need to do. They are in line with what they need to do. And we will allow you a waiver for that felony conviction where they're doing what they need to do. And from what I understood last night is almost every time when they apply for that waiver, they are granted that waiver so that that's a tool that they can use to make sure that these individuals are in fact doing what they need to be doing and can qualify for housing. So it isn't a blanket statement that they can't be put in there, but landlords can apply for a waiver and allow these individuals to come in. And I know that in Midvale in particular, they're saying we like that waiver program because it gives us a way to make sure the individuals coming in are doing what they need to be doing, and they're not involved in recidivism or violations of their parole. So just keep that in mind as you vote on this. I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion on the motion to amend? Seeing none, back to you, Representative Peterson, for summation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. The bottom line is that this amendment is about public safety and proportion. Half of our halfway houses are in Salt Lake Valley, where we have 1 million plus people and 1 million plus opportunities in public transit for folks coming out of our prisons to reintegrate and diffuse in the community. In Weber County, which is mostly rural with a highly urbanized core, we have 250,000 people. And the other half of our halfway house folks coming into our community. So the proportions are off. The effects are going to be different. 20% of the individuals who come to Ogden's halfway house who are not originally from Ogden stay in the community forever. And so we have this group of folks that come and become part of our community. It's our hope that recidivism is reduced and that we can help these folks integrate as much as possible, but the facts are that recidivism is high and it does impact our community. And it does create, because of the limited population we have already there and the limited geography, it does create geographic concentration without some tools to help mitigate that and help these felons succeed. So with that, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I hope I can have your support of the amendment.
Thank you, Representative. All those in favor of adopting amendment number 1 in Representative Peterson's name, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
I rule the motion fails to pass.
Division.
Division has been called. It's like we have 10 or more standing. Voting will now be open. It's just 5. We have, well, there was even 10. So there were a lot of people standing. So voting will now be open on adoption of amendment number 1. Seeing all those present having voted, amendment number 1 to House Bill 178 passes with 38 yes votes and 34 no votes. The bill is amended. Further discussion to the bill. Representative Christensen.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, will the sponsor yield to a few questions, please?
Will the sponsor of the bill yield?
Certainly.
Proceed.
Thank you, Representative. I think everyone certainly, on the broadest sense, supports the desire to try to help people change their lives, but there's a lot of principles that are coming to bear, and I have some questions. Question number 1. Right now, you're changing law and you're broadening it. Instead of a focus on a 4-year timeline, you're going to just any and all criminal history, correct?
Correct.
So that's much broader. It could be anything of whatever gravity. But what I want to understand is that it's only applicable to the good landlord program. So if someone does have a criminal history, there could be full freedom of tenancy outside of that program, could it not?
Well, if what you're asking is whether a landlord can refuse to lease to someone with a criminal history, the answer is yes.
No, I'm asking the opposite. Is it possible for them to have the freedom to do whatever they want and to grant tenancy if they're outside the program? In other words, this one, the municipalities who've chosen to adopt a good landlord program, many of them are coming forward and saying that it's within their jurisdiction and that there are some concerns and these are the boundaries. But if you haven't adopted a good landlord, then there's no other law that would bar the parties just having freedom of contract, and the person with a criminal history can still rent wherever they go. But I think that it sounds like counties and cities are trying to create a district where they can maybe have certain things located, like they make other decisions on in-home businesses or whether it's a residential zone or a business zone. I'm just trying to understand. So in other words, this isn't the only way that you can be sensitive to someone with a criminal history and help them find a place to live as they change their lives.
Certainly people who are outside the good landlord program can have the freedom of contract to either lease to a tenant with a criminal history or not, and those who do have a criminal history, if they want to escape from the punitive measures that the good landlord program puts in place when they impose a felony exclusion, they'd be able to do that.
So there's freedom of contract outside the good landlord zones. And then if we go with this and we change the current boundaries of what is a good landlord, we would be striking the current language and simply replacing it with an unlimited reference to criminal history, regardless of what the local city or county municipality might have otherwise determined. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion to the bill. Representative Potter.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I appreciate the sponsor's intent with this bill. I understand what he's trying to do. However, the problem with this bill lies with what it says in line 12. That is, this bill prohibits a municipality. I think this is I know this is a problem for the local governments. This is a problem for the cities to deal with, and it's something that they will deal with. And it's something that we as a state should not take away from them. That's my feeling, and I would vote against this.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to the bill? Representative Lisenby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Will the sponsor yield to a question?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Proceed.
Thank you. I have concerns. One of the cities in my district has a good landlord program. They allow, through their good landlord program, though not all landlords are participating, they allow, after 4 years of clean record, renting to convicted felons. And so my concern and their concern with this bill is that it absolutely prohibits any sort of discussion on what is appropriate and what is not. And I would just ask the sponsor if there's any room for allowing for cities that currently have a good landlord program to incorporate some sort of waiver program as Ogden has tried and is successful with, or allowing a time frame for looking into a record and seeing if there's a clean record over a specific period of time. And maybe 4 years isn't the answer, but I think we're kind of binding cities' hands that have had problems and have created this program to address a specific problem from addressing it. And so I would just ask the sponsor if that's a possibility.
Thank you. This has been a bill that's been worked on for 2 years, and it was originally brought to me in connection with JRI, but we've had many, many meetings with stakeholders. And you see that at the end of the whole process, the list of folks who support the bill, including AP&P, there's been reference made to the fact that AP&P is working with Ogden on this waiver program. Well, AP&P supports the bill. They support a complete elimination of the ability of municipalities to impose any sort of restriction on landlords to rent based on criminal history. And so does the Department of Corrections, and so does the CCJJ, the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, and the Sentencing Commission. We've looked at this extensively, and the answer to your question, Representative, is that I don't think there's allowance for the kind of waivers that you're talking about in the minds of the stakeholders and in my mind. This is something that we need to get rid of. We need to move in the direction of allowing our inmates who come out of jail and prison to get back up on their feet as quickly as possible. They are already stigmatized as a population. We already allow landlords to refuse to lease to these folks, and that happens over and over and over again. So one of the other things that troubles me about the Good Landlord program, the felony exclusion on the Good Landlord program, is that there's really not good evidence to suggest that it accomplishes the goals that the proponents of the felony exclusion want to push. In other words, that it accomplishes the goals of keeping people from centralizing and that it disperses people out. In fact, the effect of this felony exclusion of the Good Landlord program is to send individuals away from cities that have these felony exclusions. I think that's wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to the bill. Representative Elison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I stand in strong support of this bill as a co-sponsor of the bill. I wear different hats as I speak about this. I'm a landlord. According to some cities, I'm not a good landlord because I choose to give some people a second chance. So they choose to charge me more if I want to give that person a second chance. I stand in support as a property owner that I should be able to choose to rent my properties to who I decide to. I think those are some of the reasons that groups like the Libertas Institute and grassroots stand in strong support of this bill because it's a fundamental property right. And I also stand in support of this bill as a strong advocate for the homeless. I spent part of my morning trying to work on issues surrounding homelessness, and it's like we're hitting the gas and the brake at the same time. We're saying we've got to solve the homeless problem. Oh, but don't rent to the people who are often homeless because of poor past decisions that are trying to turn their life around. Don't put them in my city. Let's put them in a different city. Let's just keep them in a shelter. I think it's extremely duplicitous for us to say that somebody who's paid their debt to society and wants to step back into our community, well, we're just going to have you do that in certain places, and we're going to penalize the private property owners that want to give these people a break. I recently rented to an individual, a family who'd gotten out of drug treatment. They've been fantastic tenants. I rented to somebody who'd come out of a sex offender program. Excellent tenant. But according to the cities, no, we don't want those people in our area. Let's send them someplace else. So for the reasons of personal liberty, dealing with our homeless problems, I would urge you strongly to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to the bill. Representative Hemingway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise to support this piece of legislation, and I have a bit of a personal iron in this fight, I guess. My nephew was released from prison into the Ogden system, and he was a big problem. He drove me and my wife nuts for years. But when we talk about recidivism, sometimes we neglect the success. And he has been a success. But here's something that's happened to him. He and his wife now own a home, but it has to be in his wife's name. And this makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. He's been out of prison for 10 years. They're taxpayers. They've got 3 kids. But they got a break. And I think that this piece of legislation is about getting a break, and I hope you can support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion to the bill. Representative Val Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Previous question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of ending debate say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
The motion passes. The disappointment of Representative McKay. Back to the bill sponsor, Representative King, for summation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Colleagues, this is an important bill when we're talking about such fundamental things as private property rights. It's an important bill when you're talking about such things as giving people a new chance, a free chance, a good chance once they've paid their debt to society to try and get back up on their feet. It's an important bill from the perspective of Justice Revitalization Initiative, trying to move people out of correctional facilities and back into communities where they can support your family. It accomplishes all those things. And those who are opposing the bill haven't provided is compelling information to suggest that having this felony exclusion in place at all accomplishes anything other than further stigmatizing a vulnerable population, a group of folks that are already trying to make it after making some poor choices in their lives. There's no question about that. But they're trying to get back productive as citizens and being good fathers and mothers, being good providers for their families. That's what we want to help these folks do. And the best way of doing that is to get municipalities' fingers off the scales, thumbs off the scale of penalizing landlords who want to take the chance, and it is a risk and a chance, of renting rooms or homes to these individuals who need a place to live, quite honestly. So it addresses our homeless situation, too. There are a lot of good reasons to vote for this bill, and there aren't very many reasons to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Voting will now be open on House Bill 178, Good Landlord Amendments. Seeing all those present having voted, House Bill 178 passes this body with 62 yes votes and 9 no votes and will be transmitted to the Senate for further consideration.